The night sky over Earth was filled with strange lights. People across the world stood outside their homes and stared at the burning trails moving through the dark. The news spread fast. Fleet was returning, one that had been gone for many years. These were not strangers, they were once people of Earth, cast out long ago. Now they had returned, stronger than ever, carrying weapons and ships that no one on Earth had seen before. The streets in every city filled with fear. Men and women whispered about the stories they had heard when they were children. The exiles had not left willingly. They were forced into the void, sent away after bitter struggles for power. Many had thought they had died out there, yet they had survived, and now they were coming home with fire in their eyes. In the palace at the center of the capital, Queen Helena sat with her generals. Her face was calm, but her heart was heavy. She had known this day might come. Reports came in one after another. The fleets of the exiles were massive. They carried weapons forged in hardship and war. The generals spoke with anger and fear. Some said they should seek peace, but most knew peace was not what the exiles wanted. The exiles had returned for revenge. Helena stood up and looked at her men. Her voice was sharp. She said Earth would not bow. She said that every city and every soldier must prepare. She declared that war was the only answer. Her words carried across the halls like thunder, and no one dared speak against her. Far from the palace, soldiers prepared in their barracks. Jack cleaned his rifle with steady hands. He was young, but his eyes carried the weight of many battles. Beside him sat Claire, who tied her boots and checked her gear. Daniel and Olivia stood at the door, waiting for the orders that would soon come. None of them spoke much. The silence in the room said enough. They all knew this was not just another battle. This was a war for the very soul of Earth. That night the sky grew brighter as the exiles drew closer. Their ships entered orbit, casting shadows over the cities below. The people of Earth had never seen such power. Some fell to their knees in despair, but others clenched their fists. If the exiles wanted to take back Earth, they would have to fight for every inch of it. Helena's words reached the soldiers in every camp and every base. She told them that Earth had been wounded in the past, but now it would rise stronger than ever. She said the exiles may have learned new ways of war, but they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten the will of those who stayed behind, the will of those who refused to fall. The first alarms rang across the defense lines. Sirens cut through the night. Jack and his squad were rushed to their positions. Engines roared as tanks moved through the streets. Aircraft thundered overhead, heading toward the dark shapes in the sky. Families ran to shelters as soldiers filled the walls and gates. Jack looked at Claire and gave a small nod. She returned it without words. Daniel checked the safety of his weapon. Olivia pulled her helmet tight. They were ready. No one had asked for this war, but it had come, and now they would stand. Above them, the exiles' ships began to open fire. Bolts of light and storms of flame tore across the sky. Earth's defenses answered back with everything they had. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. Queen Helena stood at the highest tower, watching the sky burn. She did not flinch. She had sworn that Earth would not bow, and she meant it. The exiles had returned, but they would learn that Earth was no longer broken. The people of Earth would rise together, and they would fight until the last breath. The sound of war filled the night, and the world held its breath. The first clash came at dawn. The sky was red from fire and smoke. The exiles had launched their first strike during the night, but Earth's armies had managed to hold their ground. Now the order was given for a counterattack. General Adams stood at the command post and gave the signal. The great machines of Earth moved forward, and the soldiers marched with grim faces. Jack, Claire, Daniel, and Olivia were part of the first wave. Their unit moved through the ruins of the city toward the edge where the exiles had landed. Buildings were broken, streets were filled with fire, and the sound of battle never stopped. They pushed forward step by step, rifles ready, waiting for the storm that was coming. Jack's hands were steady, but his heart raced. He remembered Queen Helena's words, "Earth would not bow." He repeated them in his mind as he led his squad. Claire stayed close behind him, her eyes sharp, scanning every shadow. Daniel carried the heavy weapon and walked like a shield for the others. Olivia checked the sky, watching the burning streaks of fire that rained down. When they reached the outer street, the attack began. The exiles struck with weapons that cut through walls and tore the ground apart. Earth's tanks fired back, shaking the ground with each shot. Jets roared above, missiles streaking into the enemy lines. The battle was a storm of steel and fire. Jack shouted to his squad to move into cover. They ducked behind a broken wall as the air shook with explosions. Claire returned fire, her rifle cracking again and again. Daniel set up his weapon on the rubble and poured fire into the advancing line. Olivia relayed the positions over the comm, guiding other units to strike the enemy from the side. The fight was brutal. Every street became a trap, every corner a test of survival. Earth's soldiers held the line with courage, but the exiles pushed hard, their training and weapons showing the years they had spent preparing for this day. Men and women fell on both sides, and the streets ran with smoke and blood. General Adam watched the reports from his command post. His jaw was tight, but his voice stayed calm. He ordered the soldiers to keep pushing, to not let the exiles gain ground. He knew that if the line broke, the city would fall. He knew that the Queen had placed her trust in him, and he would not fail her. Back in the field, Jack's squad pushed deeper. He moved house to house, clearing the enemy step by step. Claire's aim never missed. Daniel's heavy fire kept the line secure. Olivia's calm voice kept the team together, guiding them through the chaos. Jack carried the weight of command, pushing forward, even when fear tried to slow his steps. They reached the edge of the main square where the battle was thickest. Earth's tanks lined the street, firing into the stronghold the exiles had set up. Soldiers rushed between the burning vehicles, shouting orders and dragging the wounded to safety. Jack's squad joined them, throwing themselves into the fight without hesitation. The exiles fought with fury. Their weapons lit the square with fire. Earth's soldiers answered with their own power, refusing to step back. The clash raged on, neither side willing to yield. The sound was deafening, the heat of battle pressing down on every fighter. Then came the signal from General Adam. The heavy artillery opened fire from the hills beyond the city. Shells screamed through the sky and crashed into the enemy lines. The ground shook, buildings fell, and the exiles' stronghold cracked under the force. Jack and his squad used the moment to charge forward, cutting through the broken line and driving the enemy back. For hours, the battle raged, and finally the exiles began to pull back. The square was won, though at a terrible cost. Bodies lay across the stones, and smoke filled the air. Jack looked at his squad. They were alive, but tired and scarred from the fight. General Adam sent word to Queen Helena. The first strike had been answered. Earth had held the line. The Queen stood at her tower and listened to the message. Her heart was heavy for the dead, but her eyes burned with pride. Earth had proven it would not bow. The war had only begun, but the first victory belonged to them. Jack stood in the square and looked at the sky. He knew the enemy would return, stronger and fiercer. But he also knew that Earth had the will to fight, and that will was stronger than any weapon. The smoke of the last battle still hung over the city when whispers began to spread. Soldiers spoke in quiet voices about why the exiles had returned. Some said it was revenge. Others said it was justice. None of them knew the full truth, but doubt was starting to grow. Jack sat with his squad in the ruins of a building. Claire cleaned her rifle in silence. Daniel wrapped a bandage around his arm where a piece of shrapnel had cut him. Olivia wrote notes in her small book, marking down the names of soldiers who had fallen that day. The air was heavy, not only with the smell of fire, but with questions no one could answer. A messenger arrived with orders. Their squad was to move to the old archives beneath the city. Rumors claimed that hidden records there could explain the history of the exiles. General Adam wanted proof of what had happened years ago, and Jack's team was chosen to go. They moved through broken streets until they reached the underground halls. Dust filled the air as they pushed open the heavy doors. Inside were rows of old files and records, untouched for years. The silence of the place was thick, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the stone floor. Claire searched the shelves and pulled out boxes of papers. Daniel found sealed containers stacked against the wall. Olivia carefully opened a file and began to read. Her face grew hard as she looked at the pages. These were orders, she said. Orders to cast out entire families, not just soldiers. They were sent away because they spoke against the leaders, not because they were traitors, but because they stood in the way. Jack took the papers from her and read. His jaw tightened. The words told a story that was darker than anyone had believed. The exiles had been betrayed by corrupt rulers who had feared their strength. They had been forced into the void, not for crimes, but because they challenged those in power. The squad looked at one another in silence. The truth was clear. The exiles had suffered because of lies and greed, yet the truth did not change the present. They had returned with fire and destruction, and Earth was already drowning in war. When they left the archives, they carried the files with them. The city above was still burning. Soldiers moved through the streets carrying the wounded and gathering supplies. Jack handed the documents to the officer waiting for them. Soon they were sent to the palace. In the great hall, Queen Helena read the papers. Her eyes grew cold as she turned each page. She knew that the sins of past rulers had brought this storm upon them. But she also knew that nothing could undo the blood already spilled. The exiles had chosen war. They had struck the first blow, and now Earth would strike back with greater force. General Adams stood beside her and said the soldiers must not hear of this truth. If they knew, doubt would spread through the ranks, and doubt could kill faster than any weapon. Helena agreed. The records would be sealed again. The war would continue, but word had already started to slip. Soldiers at the front whispered about betrayal. Some asked why they were dying if the exiles had once been victims. Others said it no longer mattered. The exiles had burned cities, killed families, and turned their pain into cruelty. Jack sat with Claire, Daniel, and Olivia that night. They spoke in low voices, torn between anger and duty. Claire said the truth was hard, but the choice was simple. The exiles had come with fire, and now they had to be stopped. Daniel agreed, his voice firm. Olivia looked at Jack, waiting for his answer. Jack stared into the flames of the small fire before him. His voice was quiet but steady. We fight because we must. Whatever was done in the past, they made their choice when they returned with war. We will not let Earth fall. The others nodded. Their doubts did not vanish, but their path was clear. The truth of betrayal was a wound, but the battle ahead was their duty. That night, the sound of distant guns rolled through the air. The exiles were moving again, pressing deeper into Earth's land. And Earth's soldiers, carrying both pride and doubt, prepared to face them once more. The war spread like fire across the land. What had started in the capital now reached the deserts, the oceans, and the mountains. The exiles moved with ruthless force, striking every city they could reach. They wanted to break Earth's spirit by burning everything that stood. Jack and his squad were sent to the coast. The city there had already been hit by airstrikes, and smoke rose in tall columns that turned the sky black. The people ran to the bunkers, while soldiers took position along the shoreline. Tanks dug in behind walls of stone, and artillery pointed toward the sea where the enemy ships were coming. Jack led his squad through the ruined streets. Claire walked beside him, rifle ready. Daniel carried extra ammunition for the heavy gun strapped to his back. Olivia checked the com for updates, her voice steady as she passed orders to the unit. The city was alive with the sounds of engines, shouted commands, and the cries of civilians who did not know if they would live to see another day. When the first enemy landing crafts appeared on the horizon, the city trembled. Sirens wailed. The defenders tightened their grips on their weapons. General Adams' voice came over the channel. He said, "No ground could be given," said the line must hold or the coast would fall. The battle began with thunder. Enemy fire rained across the shore, tearing through defenses and sending waves of sand and stone into the air. Earth's artillery answered back. Shells fell into the sea, striking the landing ships and tearing them apart. Yet more came forward, a tide that seemed endless. Jack's squad took position near the harbor. The enemy poured in, rushing up the docks with weapons blazing. Jack fired, his rifle cutting down attackers as they charged. Claire's shots were sharp and sure, never missing their mark. Daniel unleashed bursts from his heavy gun, sweeping the docks and forcing the enemy to take cover. Olivia called in strikes, guiding Earth's artillery with calm precision. The clash was brutal. Every street near the harbor became a battlefield. Buildings fell as fire consumed them. Tanks rolled forward, firing into the waves of attackers. The defenders fought with all their strength, but the exiles would not stop. Jack's squad was ordered to push toward the lighthouse, where enemy troops had established a strong position. They moved under heavy fire, dodging explosions and climbing over rubble. Claire led the way into the broken building, clearing the upper floors with quick shots. Daniel held the stairwell, his heavy gun thundering down at the enemy below. Olivia called in support, fire that shook the walls around them. When the lighthouse was secured, Jack looked out across the sea. The water was burning, filled with wreckage and smoke. But more ships were coming, carrying more soldiers ready to strike. He knew the battle was far from over. At the command post, General Adam gave new orders. Earth's air fleet was to strike the incoming wave before it reached the shore. Within minutes, the roar of engines filled the sky. Fighter jets streaked over the water, dropping bombs and firing missiles. The sea lit up with explosions as ships cracked and burned. The defenders cheered, but the victory was not without cost. The city was half destroyed, the harbor torn apart, and countless soldiers had fallen. Jack's squad regrouped in the ruins, their faces covered in dirt and sweat. Claire's hands were steady, though her eyes showed the weight of what they had seen. Daniel reloaded his weapon in silence. Olivia wrote again in her book, marking the names of those they had lost. That night, as the fires burned across the coast, Queen Helena stood before her people. She spoke with a voice that carried across the land. She said Earth had been struck, but Earth had not fallen. She said every man and woman must rise, for the exiles would burn the world if they were not stopped. Her words reached every soldier, every family, every heart. Jack heard the speech from the camp near the ruins of the lighthouse. He looked at his squad and saw the same fire in their eyes that burned in his own. They were tired, but they would not stop. The war was spreading, but so was their resolve. The coast had held, but the fight had only grown fiercer. The exiles had shown their cruelty, striking at cities and families to spread fear. Yet the people of Earth had answered with courage, proving they would fight for every street and every stone. As the night grew dark, the sound of distant guns rolled again. Another battle was coming. Jack gripped his rifle and knew the war was far from over. The war dragged on, and every day the battles grew harder. Earth had not fallen, but the cost was rising. Cities burned, armies bled, and families prayed for strength. Yet in the ruins, something stronger began to grow. Soldiers who had once fought in separate units now stood together as one force. Men and women who had never met before now fought side by side, bonded by survival and duty. Jack and his squad were among them. They had fought through the capital and the coast, and now they were called to join a new mission. General Adam had planned a daring strike deep into the heart of the exiles' command. The goal was to break their stronghold and cut their leaders off from the armies that spread across the land. The plan was dangerous. The enemy's stronghold was buried inside a mountain fortress, guarded by heavy weapons and thick walls. Few believed they could breach it, but General Adam said they must try. If the stronghold fell, the exiles would lose their grip on the war. Jack gathered his squad and explained the mission. Claire checked her rifle and nodded without hesitation. Daniel strapped the heavy gun to his back and grinned with grim resolve. Olivia adjusted her helmet and said she would guide them every step of the way. None of them spoke of fear, though each carried it inside. They had already seen too much to believe survival was certain. The strike force moved at night. Tanks rolled under the cover of darkness. Soldiers marched in silence, their boots pressing into the dirt roads. Aircraft circled above, ready to strike when the time came. Jack led his squad at the front, their eyes fixed on the looming mountain where the enemy waited. When dawn came, the battle erupted. Earth's artillery opened fire first, shaking the ground with each blast. The fortress walls lit up with explosions, but they held firm. The exiles returned fire with cannons that tore through the air and sent shockwaves across the valley. Soldiers dove for cover as steel and stone rained down. Jack shouted for his squad to move. They dashed from rock to rock, closing in on the fortress. Claire fired at enemy positions on the wall, picking off gunners who tried to hold the line. Daniel dropped to one knee and unleashed streams of fire, forcing the defenders to duck behind their cover. Olivia called in coordinates, guiding the artillery to pound the gates with relentless strikes. The battle raged for hours. Earth's forces pushed forward step by step, never stopping. The air was filled with smoke and the cries of war. Many soldiers fell, but still the line pressed on. Jack felt the weight of every life lost, but he knew the only way forward was through the fire. By midday, the gates of the fortress were cracked but still standing. General Adam gave the order for a direct assault. Jack's squad was chosen to lead the charge. They sprinted through the valley, explosions bursting around them, until they reached the shattered doors. With a final blast from the tanks, the gates gave way, and the soldiers stormed inside. The fight within was chaos. Narrow halls turned into killing grounds as the exiles fought with desperation. Jack led his squad through the smoke, clearing room after room. Claire never missed a shot, her aim sharp as steel. Daniel's gun thundered, cutting down enemies who blocked their path. Olivia guided them through the maze of tunnels, her voice calm even in the storm. At last they reached the command chamber. Inside, the enemy leaders stood around a great table. For a moment the room was still, then the clash began. Bullets ripped through the air, shouts echoed off the stone walls. Jack and his squad fought with every ounce of strength left in them. When it was over, the chamber was silent. The enemy leaders lay defeated. Jack stood with his squad, blood and dust covering their armor, but their eyes burned with victory. They'd struck at the heart of the enemy, and the fortress was falling. Outside, Earth's flag was raised above the broken gates. Soldiers cheered, their voices echoing across the valley. The stronghold was theirs. Queen Helena heard the news from her tower. She closed her eyes for a moment, proud of her people and their courage. The exiles had been wounded deeply. The war was not over, but for the first time, it felt as though Earth might rise above the fire. Jack stood at the mountainous edge and looked down at the valley filled with smoke and ash. He knew the enemy would strike again. He knew the war would demand more from them all. But he also knew that Earth was stronger now, and nothing would stop them from fighting back. The fortress had fallen, but the war was far from over. The exiles regrouped quickly, pulling back their scattered forces and gathering for a counterattack. Earth's victory had struck them hard, yet it had also awakened their fury. Now they prepared to strike with everything they had left. In the ruins of the fortress, Jack and his squad rested for only a short while. Claire sat against the wall, her rifle across her knees, her eyes sharp even as her body ached. Daniel cleaned his heavy gun, his hands steady despite the cuts and bruises on his arms. Olivia looked through the recovered files, searching for anything that could give them an advantage. What she found made the air in the room grow heavy. The papers told the story of betrayal in full detail. The exiles had once been Earth's generals and leaders. Men and women who had been cast out not for crimes but because of politics and greed. They had been sent away by rulers who feared losing their power. Jack read the words in silence. His face was hard, his jaw set. The truth was clear now. The war was not only about revenge. It was about justice twisted into rage. The exiles wanted to burn the earth that had betrayed them, and they would not stop until it was theirs. That night, Queen Helena arrived at the fortress with her guard. She walked through the broken halls and saw the blood and smoke that marked the price of victory. When Jack and his squad handed her the files, she read them with cold eyes. She did not deny the truth. She said the sins of the past were real, but the present could not be ignored. The exiles had chosen war, not peace. They had destroyed cities, killed families, and turned their pain into cruelty. Whatever wrongs had been done to them long ago, they had crossed a line that could never be forgiven. General Adam agreed, but he warned that the truth might still spread among the soldiers. If doubt reached the army, it could break their spirit. The Queen answered that the spirit of Earth did not come from lies. It came from courage and unity. She would fight with the truth, not hide from it. From the hills around the fortress came fire and thunder. Shells slammed into the walls and the ground shook as enemy forces poured in from every side. The battle was sudden and brutal, catching many soldiers off guard. Jack's squad was thrown back into the fight. Claire fired from the walls, striking enemies as they rushed up the slopes. Daniel set up his heavy gun and unleashed streams of fire that cut through the advancing line. Olivia shouted positions into the cum, guiding Earth's artillery to strike at the enemy columns. Jack led the charge through the broken gates, rallying soldiers who had begun to fall back. The exiles fought with desperate fury. Their leaders had fallen, but their will to destroy Earth burned brighter than ever. Men and women clashed in the smoke, steel against steel, fire against fire. Every step was a test of survival. Queen Helena herself took the field. Dressed in armor, she stood at the front of her guard and drove her sword into the heart of the battle. Her voice rose above the storm, calling her people to stand. Her presence turned fear into fire, and soldiers who had begun to falter rose again with new strength. The fighting raged all day. The fortress walls cracked under the strain, but Earth's defenders held them. Jack's squad fought until their bodies ached and their weapons ran hot. Claire's hands never shook. Daniel's gun never slowed. Olivia's voice never lost its calm. Jack's will never bent. As night fell, the exiles began to pull back. Their counterattack had failed. The fortress stood in Earth's hands, scarred but unbroken. The ground outside was littered with the price of the fight, but Earth had endured. When the guns fell silent, Jack stood on the wall and looked at the horizon. He knew this was not the end. The exiles would not give up so easily. They still had armies, they still had fire, and they still carried hatred deep in their hearts. But he also knew that Earth had something stronger. They had unity. They had courage. They had leaders willing to fight at the front, and soldiers who refused to bow. The war was not finished, but the spirit of Earth was rising. The Queen raised her sword in the firelight, and the soldiers cheered. They had faced betrayal, fury, and death, yet they still stood. As long as they stood, Earth would not fall. The counterattack had failed, but the war reached its final stage. The exiles had pulled back into the mountains, where their last stronghold stood. It was larger than the fortress, hidden deep in stone and guarded by walls of iron. If they held it, they could rebuild their forces. If Earth broke it, the war would end. Jack and his squad marched with the main army as the Queen led her soldiers to the mountains. The path was steep and filled with traps, but Earth's forces moved forward with steady resolve. The memory of the fortress burned in their minds. They knew the price of failure, and they would not pay it again. Claire walked at Jack's side. Her eyes were sharp, her rifle ready. Daniel carried the heavy gun on his back, his strength pushing him through the rough climb. Olivia kept maps and records close, guiding the soldiers through the dangerous trails. Jack stayed at the front, his voice steady, his spirit unshaken. After days of marching, they reached the valley where the stronghold waited. The walls rose high, armed with cannons and heavy guns. The exiles stood behind them in ranks, their banners lifted, their faces hard with rage. They shouted across the valley, vowing to see Earth burn. The Queen stepped forward, her sword in hand. She called to her people, her voice clear and strong. She said the exiles had chosen this path. They had turned their pain into war, their anger into chains. But Earth was united. Earth would not bow. She raised her sword high, and the soldiers roared back with voices that shook the valley. The final battle began. Cannons thundered from the walls, shaking the ground. Earth's artillery answered, striking the stronghold with fire and steel. The valley filled with smoke and the screams of war. Jack led his squad through the chaos, charging with the first wave toward the gates. Claire fired at the walls, clearing the way for the men below. Daniel set up his heavy gun, pouring fire into the towers and breaking the enemy line.
Olivia
Shouted orders into the cum, directing the artillery to strike weak points in the walls. Jack drove forward with sword in hand, his strength pulling the soldiers after him. The battle raged through the day. The walls cracked under the fire. The gates splintered beneath the ram. The exiles fought with fury, but Earth's army pressed on without fear. Men fell, but more rose to take their place. The Queen fought among them, her blade cutting through the storm, her voice keeping hope alive. At last the gates broke. Jack's squad was the first inside. The stronghold was a maze of iron halls and burning chambers. The exiles fought from every corner, but the squad moved with unbroken will. Claire struck with precise shots. Daniel's fire tore through defenses. Olivia marked the routes, guiding them deeper. Jack led from the front, his sword striking down every foe in his path. In the heart of the stronghold, they found the last leader of the exiles. He stood in the great hall, armor black with soot, his face twisted with rage. He shouted that Earth had betrayed them once and would betray them again. He swore he would see the world turn to ash before he bowed. Jack faced him without fear. The hall shook with their clash. The leader fought with all the strength of his fury, but Jack fought with the strength of his people. The blades rang, the walls shook, and at last Jack drove his sword through the enemy's guard. The leader fell, his cry echoing through the hall. When the last leader was gone, the stronghold broke. The exiles threw down their arms. Some fled into the mountains. Some fell to their knees. Earth's soldiers raised their voices in victory. The war that had burned across the land was at last over. Jack stood in the hall, his chest rising with heavy breaths. Claire, Daniel, and Olivia stood beside him. They had carried the weight of war, and they had endured. The queen entered, her armor stained, her sword still in her hand. She looked at them and gave a nod. No words were needed. The stronghold burned behind them as the sun rose over the valley. Earth's soldiers stood together, scarred but unbroken.
Ow.
The queen raised her sword high, and the army roared. Wait, what? With all budgets. We're right, I died out dead. I'm all into it. He thought of the cost, of the lives lost, of the cities scarred. Ow. But he also thought of the unity forged in fire. Earth had faced betrayal, fury, and death, and had risen stronger. The exiles had fallen, but Earth endured. The spirit of Earth was unbroken. The world would rebuild. The people would rise again. As long as men and women stood together with courage in their hearts, no force could break them.